All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julian Morse. I'm the MLA for Frame Lake and chair of this committee. This public briefing of the Standing Committee on Government Operations is being live streamed on the Assembly's social media channels. Before we continue, as a reminder, please direct all comments and questions through the chair, and this helps us keep the meeting organized and running smoothly, particularly with so many online participants. So I'm going to ask members to introduce themselves, and since we're online, I'll just list you off. Mr. Rogers, you can start us off there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, everyone. Welcome the guests. My name is Denny Rogers. I'm the MLA for Inuvik Boot Lake.
Thank you. MLA Reid, next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, my name is Kate Reid. I am the member for Great Slave in Yellowknife. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Hawkins as well. Unfortunately, we're still having some audio issues there. I'll introduce on his behalf, Mr. Hawkins is the MLA for Yellowknife Centre, and as he always states, he's happy to be here. So this afternoon, as part of our review of the Northwest Territories Power Corporation's governance structure, we are pleased to welcome Professor Monica Gattinger, who is founding chair of the Positive Energy Program at the University of Ottawa. Thank you very much for joining us, Monica. We'll begin with your presentation, and then we'll do a Q&A period after the presentation is done. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before the committee. You're dealing with some really important issues, and delighted to have the opportunity to provide this briefing to the committee. So I was asked, just so folks are aware, I was asked to share with you some of the recent research that we've been doing at the University of Ottawa through the Positive Energy Program around public and investor confidence in energy project decision-making. There are, I believe, some links through to the work that you're doing, looking at the governance structure for the NTPC. And you'll see as I move through the presentation that I get sort of closer and closer to those questions. As I begin, I would like to recognize that I'm joining you from the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. And I would also like to thank Committee Member Reid for her reflection at the beginning. She could have read it at maybe 1/4 the speed, and I still would have been incorporating it as she was reading it. What a beautiful reflection. Thank you very much. So without further ado, if we could move to the next slide. So I'm going to start with a little bit of context in terms of energy policy and electricity utilities. I think, if there's one maybe message to the committee that I would share, it is that to the extent that you're able to think about any reforms that you recommend to the governance structure of the NTPC, to put those into the broader context of energy decision-making in the territory. Sometimes we have found in our work at Positive Energy that we sort of think that there's a problem in one part of the system, but maybe it's actually only a symptom of related problems in other parts of decision-making systems. And so you'll see as I move through the presentation, some of what I share is really about that sort of broader context. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about public confidence. And this is really the confidence of people in decisions that governments make around energy. Then we'll get into the topic of the day, which is about reforming energy decision-making, and in this case, in particular, the governance of the NTPC. And then I'm going to end with some key questions for the committee to consider. I'm not an expert in the energy decision-making arrangements, nor the NTPC. You're the experts here, but hopefully some of these questions will be useful for you in terms of your reflections and your work. So next slide. And we can go straight ahead to the next slide. So my background and training is in energy policy. So many of the issues in the energy sector, whether it's around climate or affordability or resilience, really are, from my perspective, I walk through the door of energy policy to those questions. And so I always begin, when I'm thinking about any matter involving energy and government's role in energy, thinking about the energy trilemma, which is trying to get policies that find a workable balance between affordability of energy, sustainability of energy. And so from a sustainability perspective, yes, that's climate, but that's also, environmental impacts on the land, on the air, on water. It's all about resilience. And then the security of energy, which can include, security of supply. It can include reliability of energy. And really for energy policymakers, they're always trying to find that durable balance among those economic, security, and sustainability objectives that will stand the test of time. So when I think about all of these questions, I really start to come at them through, sort of through that fundamental grounding. Next slide. So what does durable, energy policy look like? Well, it's forever a work in balance. We see certainly a lot of changes over time in terms of where the public wants to see those balance points be struck between those three, imperatives of affordability, security, and sustainability. And certainly in the work that we've been doing recently here in Canada, we're seeing that the balance is very much shifting back towards affordability, economy, and security imperatives. So while there remains a very strong focus, we do a lot of public opinion survey research, very strong focus on climate change and environmental imperatives. What we see in much of that work is that Canadians, and by extension governments and policymakers, are looking to put more emphasis on economy and security. And so for Canada, durable balance in terms of energy policy really means a balance that will not only secure public confidence, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but also investor confidence. At the end of the day, if we're building energy infrastructure, we need investors to be confident in our policy and regulatory frameworks, and whether that's private capital or capital coming through government balance sheets. Of course, durable balance for Canada also means a balance that respects Indigenous rights, and I'll speak a little bit more about that throughout the presentation. And then if you're the federal government, it's also about maintaining national unity in a very divided and decentralized energy system, given our federal system in Canada. Next slide. So if we think about energy policy and electricity utilities, so again, sort of starting to get closer to the topic of your current study, we're seeing that electricity utilities, they have a growing role in energy transition and in electrification. And so, whether it's the public or governments are really turning to them more and more in terms of the roles that they can play to try to reduce GHG emissions, to try to provide electricity to jurisdictions that or communities that perhaps don't have it, or that don't have reliable electricity. We're increasingly seeing as well that governments are beginning to transform the mandates of electricity utilities to do things like support broader economic and climate goals. So I think there's really a growing awareness of the important role that electricity utilities play in that durable balance when it comes to energy policy. Electricity utilities also have a really pivotal role when it comes to public confidence in energy transition and in electrification. And one of the big reasons for that is that, for many people, when it comes to their the electricity that's provided to them by their utility, that's one of the closest relationships that they have in terms of their energy. And so if they are experiencing unreliable electricity, if they're experiencing affordability challenges around electricity, that can be definitely an area where it can put strain on public confidence in perhaps broader government efforts towards energy transition and electrification. We also see electricity utilities playing an increasingly large role in terms of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. You know, I can't speak to the specific context of the Northwest Territories like all of you on this committee could, but certainly we're seeing in many jurisdictions that there are, you know, increasing partnerships, true partnerships with Indigenous nations to advance energy projects, whether it's generation or transmission, or even increasingly in the area of distribution as well. And of course, electricity utilities are also big investors. They have big projects that they need to put in place to provide electricity. Next slide. So given that I was asked to speak very much around the whole topic of public confidence, I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this. And if you move to the next slide, thank you. You can think about public confidence as a three-legged stool. And so, you know, we've often in our work used the metaphor. I mean, you can use the metaphor of a stool. We use sometimes the metaphor of a hat, that people wear three hats when it comes to energy and environmental issues. And so when they're wearing their hat as a citizen, so you can think about it as the leg of the stool that is the citizen leg, you know, people are very enthusiastic about climate action. They're enthusiastic about environmental protection. They really want to see you know, governments and companies, including utilities, they want to see them do the right thing on that front. But they also wear a hat as a consumer. So you can think about that as the second leg of the public confidence stool. And as a consumer, so a customer of, in this case, electricity, people want reliable, affordable, and safe energy. And then the third hat that people can wear is as a hat as a community member. So you can think about this as sort of the community leg of the stool. And you know, people they want to say rightly, and if they're Indigenous nations, legally, in infrastructure that is going to be located in their communities. They have concerns about that infrastructure, sometimes about its safety, about its impacts on the land, about its impacts on ecosystems, et cetera. And you know, sometimes when we think about people wearing these three hats, you know, they can think one thing as a citizen, but have a different perspective as a community member. So, you know, we have seen in our research that that people, when they're thinking through that citizen lens, can be very enthusiastic and very supportive of climate action, but that doesn't necessarily translate into support for energy projects at the local level that will actually be beneficial for the global climate, because they're concerned about local environmental impacts. And so when it comes to thinking about, you know, policy, thinking about, in this case, governance of electricity utilities, when we're looking at public confidence, it's really important to remember that, you know, all three legs, and pay attention to all three legs of this public confidence stool, or we might, you know, we might find public confidence wobbling in organizations or in directions that governments are taking. Next slide. So we've done a tremendous amount of work looking at energy decision-making, in particular for energy projects, but a number of the insights from that work, I think, are relevant to some of the reforms that the committee is contemplating for the Power Corporation. And so our work really comes to reforming energy decision-making through that lens of public confidence, but also investor confidence. Because again, at the end of the day, if we need to build energy infrastructure, there has to be that confidence of whoever the proponent is and wherever those investment dollars are coming from. Next slide. So we did a massive study over the course of the last couple of years in this space. You know, we looked at about 20 different energy projects across the country, trying to get an understanding of where were some of the key challenges to building energy projects. What were some of the things that led to success of projects? Where were some of the key tension points, et cetera? And we also interviewed about 36 senior leaders, predominantly from energy companies, Indigenous organizations, the finance and investment community, folks who are really involved in building infrastructure. And this, this was a study that looked across the energy sector writ large, but we did absolutely connect with folks in the utility space, and in particular, or specifically the electricity space as well. And what we found in terms of the overarching keys when it comes to successful reforms of decision making is that we really need to try to strive for timely, clear, and predictable. And in this case, we're referring to government decision making. So whether that's policymakers or regulators, or in this case, utilities, really having that clarity, predictability, and timeliness of decision making, and putting in place frameworks that will foster that is really important. The second really important key to successful reform is something I alluded to earlier, is that when we're looking at reforms to any individual part of the decision system, so in this case, the NTPC, it's really useful to try to place those reforms into the broader decision-making system. And, it could very well be, and I don't know the answer to this question, those on the committee would, but it could very well be that reforms to the NTPC are a necessary condition, but they may not be a sufficient condition to try to get at some of the key challenges that the territory is facing currently in this space. And then finally, in terms of keys to successful reform, is Indigenous relationships. And we have, seen a remarkable transformation in Canada around the, successful partnerships between utilities and other energy corporations with Indigenous nations, and the importance. Pivotal importance of not losing sight of that. And I think we are seeing a number of jurisdictions currently that aren't necessarily paying enough attention to that in terms of reforms, and finding that they're running into quite a few challenges. So that that early, meaningful, genuine, authentic engagement, partnerships, including equity partnerships, are really becoming table stakes, as it were, to reforms to decision making. Next slide, please. And so if we're thinking again about kind of the energy decision system writ large, at the very broadest level, we can think about the importance, if you're a government, of putting in place a very clear vision and policy for energy, and really making sure that there's alignment there from the broadest level of policy down through to various individual programs, or in this case, the role of the electricity utility. The second thing that's come forward increasingly in our work is the need for strong planning processes, and that can be defined in many different ways, but for purposes of this, of the committee's study, I think the key there is about, looking at what the electricity needs are going forward, what that's going to mean in terms of necessary infrastructure, where some of those demand growth is going to come from, and ensuring that, that you've got a planning process in place that will enable that durable balance in electricity between affordability, reliability, and sustainability. And then finally, capacity. So really ensuring, not only that you've got really strong capacity in the NTPC, but also in other, related and relevant organizations. So that could be the regulator, that could be, the energy ministry. It could be Indigenous nations, Indigenous communities, ensuring that capacity is there. And it's not just necessarily about human resources capacity. It's also about, labor and supply chain. And so if we're thinking about, building projects, ensuring that as projects move forward, you have the appropriate, level of, labor force requirements, whether that's skilled trades or other, other elements of the labor force, and then also supply chain, ensuring that, if you're building a new project, all of the various elements that are going to be needed for that project are available. Next slide. So then at the operational level, and I think this is starting to get much closer to the work that the committee is doing on the NTPC, it's really thinking about, and here, I'm thinking in particular about the positioning of the NTPC in relationship to the relevant regulators, government departments, key Indigenous organizations, and nations, and ensuring that that any reforms to decision making and reforms to the NTPC are driving in the direction of making it really clear, if it isn't already clear, clarifying who decides when it comes to specific specific areas or specific functions. So that could be who decides whether a particular energy project goes forward or not, who decides on rates, who decides on the electricity plan and the electricity planning process. So it's really ensuring that you've got some clarity around respective roles and responsibilities as between the key players in that energy decision-making system. The other key piece is coordination between governments. And in this case, if you're thinking about at the level of the Northwest Territories, looking at the coordination between the territorial government, other governments within the territories, Indigenous governments, ensuring that coordination, those mechanisms of coordination are really strong. So that, again, if you're thinking about where does the NTPC sit in that broader decision-making environment, that it's sitting in a decision-making system where there's good coordination between various governments. There's also coordination within government. I mean, one of the things that we are frequently seeing now is that to the extent that energy and electricity in particular is a very important driver of economic growth, of energy transition, of prosperity, of security, that is increasingly involving multiple government departments, not just the energy ministry. It can be, the economic ministry, labor force ministry, mining, et cetera. And so ensuring that there's that coordination within government so that the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. And, again, it goes back to this clarity of policy and vision and trying to ensure that everybody is aligned and moving in the same direction. And then finally, and again, this one I think would probably be well worth the committee giving some thought to, is we've uncovered in our work that frequently when we're thinking about reforms, it can be really useful to draw the distinction between the mandate of an organization and the mindset with which that organization pursues its mandate. And so this would be another way of saying, what is the culture of an organization? And so, I think it's useful to think through, does an organization require a change to its mandate, or is it really about the mindset with which that mandate is pursued that is perhaps leading to some challenges? And conversely, if you're going to change the mandate of an organization, how much change will that lead to if the mindset of the organization is not going to be comfortable pursuing that new mandate? Next slide. So we're getting to the questions now for the committee to consider. So just another couple of slides left, and then I'm really looking forward to your questions. So a number of questions that I thought might be, again, hopefully helpful for the committee in its considerations and in its study. And you'll see that these flow out of the material that I've just shared with you. And so I think, there are a number of questions here, and I'll just walk through each of them in turn. So I guess the first, and this goes back to the main message that I wanted to impart to you today, is our reforms to governance of the NTPC, are they being undertaken through the lens of the entire government of the Northwest Territories energy decision system? And perhaps that's not relevant, but I think it is worth almost sort of a signal check to ensure that focus on reforms to NTPC, are not maybe obscuring that there are other matters that also will need to be attended to in order to set up the NTPC for success. The second question here, is government policy. Is it timely? Is it clear? Is it predictable enough for the NTPC to understand its role in the broader energy system? And I recognize the committee, depending on how it writes up its report, may not weigh into this, but I think it's worth considering what are the conditions that will set the NTPC up for success? Because we have seen in other jurisdictions that if there isn't sort of clarity and predictability in broader policy frameworks for energy, that other government bodies, whether they're regulators or crown utilities like the NTPC, that they struggle with pursuing their mandate because they're not entirely sure sort of how they are intended to be contributing to broader government public policy. Third, will reforms secure the confidence of the public? It goes back to the three-legged stool as citizens, consumers, and community members. So worth, sort of a signal check when you're thinking about reforms that you might want to recommend. How will they land with people as citizens? How will they land with people when they're wearing their consumer hat and wearing their hat as a community member? And then will those reforms also secure the confidence of the NTPC as an investor? Back to one of the earlier slides, electricity utilities, they're big investors in terms of electricity infrastructure. And, we have seen in our work in some instances where utilities, including crown utilities, they themselves sometimes struggle with having confidence in the systems that are in place for them to be making decisions around needed infrastructure. Next slide, and this is our last slide. The planning piece that I was mentioning earlier, and so our energy planning processes robust in the territories, and do the NTPC and other key organizations and rights holders and other levels of government, do they have the capacity that they need to feed into those processes? Because again, that lays the framework for decision making of the NTPC. Is it clear who decides what, when, and how when it comes to energy and cost allocation? These are some of the big questions that we're seeing coming at energy decision systems, to the extent that much of the needed infrastructure, particularly in the electricity space, if jurisdictions are very ambitious in terms of electrification, in terms of utilizing the electricity sector to drive down emissions, those can be extremely large investments that can be very difficult to put onto the rate base. And so it opens up the need for some clarity around what the respective roles of the government, of the regulator, and of the utility are in terms of which pieces are falling on the rate base versus on the tax base or other mechanisms to support those investments. Are there adequate mechanisms for coordination within the government and between governments? So that gets again to this whole piece about coordination. And then finally, as noted, the culture piece. And I think you would be best positioned to know, but is what's needed a change of mandate and substantial changes to governance, or is some of this more about changing mindsets and shifting organizational culture to align more with current considerations? So, Mr. Chair, I will conclude the presentation there. I'm really looking forward to your questions and your comments.
Sure, thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation. My first question I have from Mr. Hawkins. Mr. Hawkins, I might try to give you an opportunity to try and get your audio working. Do you want to try and see if it'll work? Because it's been on and off, and sometimes we've been able to get you. So I want to give you the opportunity to ask your question verbally first in case it works. Okay. Darn, unfortunately, it's still not working. So the question Mr. Hawkins wanted to ask was for your thoughts on innovation in the system. That's the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilmember Hawkins, for the question. So I will take a stab at an answer. If I'm not referring to the right kind of innovation and what you had in mind, please feel free to correct me in the chat, and I can take another attempt. I think one of the things, if we think about innovation within utilities, one of the factors that is frequently pointed to by utilities themselves is that the regulatory frameworks that they operate within aren't necessarily conducive to innovation. I can't speak to the case of the Northwest Territories, but it's certainly an area that is very common across many jurisdictions in Canada, that utilities would like to be more innovative. They would like to do more in the areas, let's say, of demand response or distributed energy resources, or a whole host of areas that could actually be very beneficial for the electricity system and for customers, and for broader objectives that governments might have. But it can be challenging sometimes if the regulatory frameworks aren't necessarily aligned or enabling and facilitating of that kind of innovation. So that would be kind of one element that I would point to, but I'm not sure, Councilmember Hawkins, if it's what you had in mind. Please feel free to enter into the chat if I was off base of your thinking on innovation.
Okay, thank you for that question. Thoughts on risk and responsibility. And I am sorry, it's just having a bit of technical difficulty here, but that is the question. Thoughts on risk and responsibility.
Oh, again, I'll you'll forgive me if I'm not, I hope, if I'm not coming at this in the way that you had in mind. I think this starts to get into much more kind of detailed thinking about the mandate and governing structure of the organization and what its specific roles and responsibilities are, and that connects to potentially the level of independence of the organization. So I think where my thoughts on risk and responsibility would go would in part depend on what is the problem that we're looking to solve for. If we are looking for a utility that is willing to take more risk, I think that has implications for what does the governance of that entity look like, and what does the mandate of that entity look like? How much responsibility, frankly, is conferred to that organization? And in general, I would say that I think we want our utilities to be able to take more risks responsibly, to your question. But there's a tremendous amount of change in the electricity sector in terms of technological capabilities, in terms of the availability of things like solar and batteries, and the capacity for individual customers to be able to generate some of their own electricity, but then potentially connect up as well to the grid. And if our utilities don't have the capacity and the responsibility, frankly, to take some risks, there can be some real benefits that are foregone. So it really comes back to what is the problem that we're trying to solve for here, and the committee would be in the best position to be able to answer that question. But again, Mr. Hawkins, please feel free to clarify in the chat if I haven't taken the question with the right angle.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Ms. Reid next to try some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just so Ms. Gattinger knows, it's not we're not council people. We're MLAs, but that's okay. It's an easy mistake to make. So thank you very much for the presentation. I found it really, really helpful, and I really appreciate the questions that you posed back to us. I think that will help us dial in some of how we're framing our recommendations and questions we want to sit and discuss together. But you know, one thing I would note from your presentation as a whole, and something that I have heard from my constituents, is that, you know, the current structure and the confidence in some of how our energy system and various bodies operate in the territory, there's a low confidence, I would say, is a fair assessment in the public of how we're, you know, how decisions are communicated, why things are done the way they're done. There is work underway, obviously, to change these sorts of things, especially, I hope, around decision making and clarity in decision making. But if you ask the average person on a street in any town in the territory, you're not going to find someone who has an expert understanding of how all the pieces work together and how the governance works. We've had some really amazing presentations from especially Alaska around their cooperative models. And it seems like when you put the power of decision making back into the hands of local organizations, that there is a lot of really great things that can happen, and a lot of things can gel at a larger level through an association of co-ops. And I was just wondering if you studied any of public confidence in those sorts of models. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, MLA Reid. Please, anytime I said council, what I meant was committee. My apologies for I meant committee member. So thank you for that question. And there has been a lot of work, you know, that has been done around the democratization of energy decision making and the extent to which the involvement of people at the local level can really help to strengthen confidence in a number of ways. You know, that they begin to better understand their energy systems, because I absolutely agree, and the research would bear this out. The average person, for obvious and I think very legitimate reasons, they're not expert in how, you know, energy comes to their doorstep, but they absolutely do care about it. And I think, you know, what we have seen with some of these democratization efforts, and they can take place in a number of different ways. So it can be, you know, as you've pointed out, if I understood correctly, energy cooperatives, or, you know, microgrids, you know, a lot of work that gets done to generate electricity locally by the coming together of a variety of different folks. It can also, you know, be undertaken by utilities at a broader level through efforts that they can undertake to involve the public in things like electricity planning. And so I think increasingly those efforts are extremely important, because once individuals are engaged in that process, they begin to better understand their energy systems, what the strengths and limitations are of those systems, what the art of the possible is with those systems. The more that they have some agency in terms of the future and the operation of those systems, that certainly can have the effect of strengthening confidence. I think, you know, certainly we've seen in our work what does not strengthen confidence is you know, not being willing to be open and involving people, or involving people, but in a way that is not authentic. that becomes, sort of a box ticking exercise, as opposed to an authentic, genuine effort to listen and be open to changing and have what is heard at that local level influence decision making. I think that maybe just the other piece I would point to, that there's a really important role there, I think, for politicians, whether that's at the territorial level, or whether that's at the local level, or with your constituents in your riding, is that politicians can play a really important role in helping to connect the dots for people. And for us, that's where that three hat metaphor, because I think people struggle sometimes with, as a citizen, I want certain things; as a community member, maybe I want other things; as a customer, maybe I'm looking for different things. And politicians can play a really important role in helping to connect the dots for people on how all of those pieces fit together. So if we want, for example, a more, a lower emitting, secure, resilient energy system, perhaps that's going to cost a little bit more, but it's going to bring real benefits to a community. And here's how we're going to go about, trying to defray those costs. And it's also, going to mean some infrastructure in communities. So that, again, that might be a battery plant or other kinds of infrastructure, but that can be really beneficial for people, because I think, folks who are expert in this space, I think we often forget that for the average person, this is not their daily existence. And so they aren't always able to connect all of those dots. And politicians can play, I think, a very important role in helping people to do that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Reid, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that really thoughtful and thorough answer. I appreciate it. In other committees, we're starting to undertake, it kind of dovetails nicely with what we're doing right now in this committee, but we're looking at some projects that are happening across the NWT in the energy sphere. One comes to mind, and if you follow us on social media at all, you can go and take a review of it yourself if you like. Here in the NWT, we have communities that are connected on a hydroelectric grid. We have more than one. We also have thermal communities that are, completely powered by diesel. And obviously, we would like to change that over time, not only for climate reasons, but for affordability reasons as well.
Yep.
And there are communities who are looking at, I would say, categorize them as sort of like energy sovereignty projects, where they would be continuing to be maybe not connected to the grid, but owning and organizing and their infrastructure and their own power generation and distribution to that community. So those are really fascinating things that are happening right now on the ground, and I apologize for my dogs in the background. But if you have any examples of specifically, I would say, Indigenous or rural communities where there are well-governed utilities, utilities that show flexibility, innovation, maybe that could prompt some insights for committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Over to the
Thank
presenter.
you. My apologies, Mr. Chair. I was very drawn into the question. Thank you very much for that question. It's really exciting to see at the local level, particularly, I would say, within Indigenous communities, that drive towards, use the term, energy sovereignty. One of the things that we sometimes see is that there can be constraints on that in terms of existing regulatory frameworks. So I think that's definitely something to consider. One thing that I would suggest, I'm less aware of Indigenous owned electricity utilities at the distribution level. I know that there is, and I'd be happy to follow up with the committee afterwards. You might be familiar with the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. They recently published a study over the course of the last year or so about the development of Indigenous-owned distribution utilities and broader electricity utilities as well. There can be quite a few, quite a few obstacles to that. And some of it is capacity. And I think that's, again, an area where governments can play a really important role in terms of helping to foster that. Some of it, though, is at that regulatory level and really updating some of those regulatory frameworks to enable that. Some of it can also be about, the need to develop and foster the ability for, the larger utilities to actually work with those communities to develop, locally driven projects so that you can bring in some of the expertise, for example, from the larger utility, but help to support a community in developing its own energy objectives. On the capacity building front, I would direct the committee's attention. It's not the only example, but one that might be worth looking at. In my home province here of Ontario, the Independent Electricity System Operator, which is in effect, the operator of the bulk power system that makes sure that demand and supply is balanced at all times on the grid, and we've got reliable power. The IESO has quite a substantial set of programs around assistance and capacity building for Indigenous communities, Indigenous nations, including really helping them to chart their own future. So where the desire is there, but maybe there's the need for some some capacity supports to support that process. And there are a number of organizations that specialize in that area as well to try to assist those communities. The development of Indigenous owned and operated local distribution companies. I'm less familiar with examples of that. I'm sure that they exist, but that to me is sort of the next frontier. Pardon, that's probably not the right word, but that's kind of an emerging area that is well worth looking at. What I'm more familiar with is situations where you have utilities partner in many instances, like a 50-50 or more equity partnership with Indigenous nations around transmission projects to get electricity to communities. So less about a utility within a specific nation.
Okay, thank you. I noted, Ms. Gattinger, that you only that you need to get going by 2:30 our time, but just if committee members have any further questions, we do have a little bit of time. Okay. I see no further questions from committee, so Ms. Gattinger, I just wanted to thank you on behalf of committee for taking the time to present to us today. We really appreciate it, and I think some of the information you shared with us gave us a lot of food for thought and will help us with our studies. So on behalf of committee, thanks so much for appearing today, and if you'd like to share any closing comments before we close the briefing, please take an opportunity now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It was a real privilege and honor to be able to brief the committee, and I will look forward with anticipation to see your study report. And I wish you all the best for your deliberations. You're dealing with some really important and pivotal issues for the territories, and I'll look forward to see the fruition of that work.
Okay, thank you very much. And so with that, this will end the public portion of this briefing. Thank you to everybody tuned in. Thank you again to Ms. Gattinger. And if committee members would like to stick around, we'll go in camera and do a debrief. Thank you.